Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Is My Website Accessible? Common Mistakes and How to Fix Them. Before I begin, I wanted to quickly go over a couple of housekeeping items for today's webinar. First, I want to encourage everyone to use the Zoom Q&A for any questions that come up during the webinar. We'll cover questions throughout the presentation and any that we missed at the end of the presentation. Second, typically ask whether the webinar recording will be available. The answer is yes. We will be providing a recording and email this to you following the presentation. So a little about MediaCurrent. We are the open source expansion partner. What this means is that we help organizations that want to elevate and advance their open source digital experience. We do this by aligning with our partners' business goals and needs and solve them with open source technologies. Our mission is to bring together the most talented team members to provide world-class solutions for the web. And so with that, I'll pass it over to today's presenters, David and Jason.
Hello, everybody. I am David Barentine. I'm one of the front-end developers here at MediaCurrent, and I am accompanied today by Jason. You want to say hello?
Hello, everybody. As I mentioned, I am a senior developer at MediaCurrent. Excited to, and I'll be doing most of the fielding of questions. So excited to have you all here today.
Awesome. So for today, let's talk about who this session is for specifically. This is kind of a general discussion on what accessibility is, how to track it, and we're kind of targeting a general audience with this. We're looking to track a lot of basic issues that could affect developers, could affect content managers, but mostly what we're doing is we're giving out some routine knowledge that can really be used by anybody who is interested in learning how to start tracking accessibility issues and how to move forward with fixing them on their own websites. So with that, the few goals that we're going to specifically shoot for is learning a general understanding of the importance of accessibility, learning how to use automated tools to help track and manage accessibility errors, which is going to be the primary part of this, and of course, learning why both automated and manual testing are important. That of which I'll get into close to the end of this, so you'll really get a feel for what I mean by automated and manual testing. So for today's agenda, we will specifically be talking about why is accessibility important? What do all of these things mean? By which I mean WCAG, 508, what the AAA and AAA sort of standards are, the available tools and how to identify problems with them, and then how to track them and giving recommended remedies. Moving on to fixing common mistakes, and of course, next steps, and we'll save some time at the very end of this for questions if you guys have any. So let's start. Why is accessibility important? Quick answer is accessibility is important because it gives the broadest access of information to the most people. This puts everyone at an equal playing field instead of adding advantages to those that don't have accessibility issues. And you may be asking, what are accessibility issues? Well, most, but not all accessibility issues are determined by some form of disability. So roughly 26% of US adults identify as having some form of disability. Many of these disabilities can cause issues for getting the same information as others on the web. When you aren't being accessible with your content, what you're actually doing is alienating a whole group of people. So it's important to be accessible for these users. And in many cases, being accessible can also fix issues that you weren't even aware were present on your website. One of the things I like to talk about specifically are curb cuts. So curb cuts are a great example of this. When they were initially put in as an accessibility feature, it was meant to help those that had to use wheelchairs to get around. What it ended up doing, it was found that it helped people with baby strollers, rolling suitcases, buggies, bikes, and many more sort of wheeled means of movement. Similar advantages can be found with accessible features on the web. One feature specifically is color contrast. So by increasing color contrast, to help those with low vision issues, you're also addressing issues for mobile users who have problems with viewing content in high brightness areas, specifically dealing with things like sun glare. So being accessible is important for those sorts of reasons, but it's also important for legal reasons. Recently, cases have gone up involving civil suits against companies that don't have accessible online presences. One of the most recent that got a larger amount of attention was the Domino's functionality not being accessible for online patrons. And it's not just large businesses that are being targeted either. So being accessible can definitely protect you and your web presence. With all that said, the question is, how do I make sure that I'm being accessible? And you can do that by using the same guidelines that are being used to help write the 508 compliance laws. So these are sort of terms to know. And the first one, as I mentioned before, is WCAG, and that stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And they're set up to use standards that are gauged on A, AA, and AAA levels of accessibility, which are ratios that kind of determine where your website falls within the realm of accessibility. Now, AAA is the highest level we can achieve, but it's also the hardest level to achieve. We should always strive for this high level, but where we can't, we must try to land on the A and AA levels as these reach the 508 compliance laws. And as for what the 508 compliance law is, it's the US federally mandated law for all electronic information to be accessible to everyone. And I know I'm throwing a lot at you right from the get-go, and it sounds like there's going to be a lot of work, but good news. A lot of the issues that can be fixed to bring your site up to meet these levels of compliance are generally easy fixes, and once you know how to look for them and document them, you can quickly resolve them. In many cases, fixing these issues isn't just for accessibility, they're generally just best practices as well. So here's a list of several common mistakes that are often found on websites. You're going to find things like missing title tags, or alt text is not there, potentially header structures out of order, or inputs are missing labels to give them context. And a big one that we see on front end is removed focus styling. But I see you're looking at all these, as I would be doing too on your end, and I know what you're thinking. I've heard of these before, but I don't really know how to find them to fix them. So what do I need to do? Luckily, that's what we're here to speak to today. So here's how we at MediaCurrent tend to go about finding and resolving accessibility issues. Firstly, we need to know which tools to use. And as you can see, there are a lot of choices when it comes to testing websites for accessibility. There isn't really a single magic tool that can take care of everything. In most cases, it's actually best to use more than one of these tools, as one may not find all the errors that another may. So using multiple tools allows you to cross-check errors on a website. A lot of these tools are free to use as well, and are really good at helping automate the task of finding issues. It's best that you take the time to really experiment with some of these and find which works best for you. Today specifically, I'll be showcasing the Wave tool. Now the Wave tool is free to use and can be added to a browser as an extension pretty easily. All you really have to do is search for it, or search for Wave tool extension, and it should be the first option that pops up. From there, add it to your browser and you're good to go. You should see a W icon in your browser, and to activate the tool, all you have to do is just click on it and start testing. And speaking of testing, it's now time for us to actually do some testing like I've been talking about. So first off, let me introduce our subject. This here is the old generic hospital. And my oh my, what a lovely site we have to showcase today. But wouldn't you know it, it is full of errors. So as we turn on our Wave tool, we can see off to the side a sort of basic guideline of what is currently present on your site. Now the Wave tool itself comes in a sort of compartmentalized way of reading out what you can find on your site. And as you can see here in the summary, we're looking at errors, contrast errors, alerts, features, structural elements, and ARIA, pieces of ARIA that are on the site. You'll also see that we have details, references, structure, and contrast, and we'll sort of touch on most of these as we're moving through documenting these errors. But first, we really want to get in here and focus on the things that we specifically want to focus on. In this case, it's going to be errors, contrast errors, and alerts. And here you can actually uncheck the other three things here. So you're not seeing all those other things while you're trying to search for the errors on the old generic hospital website. So summary gives you the idea of what these are, as well as just saying that they are errors. And you can see it's also saying one of the big errors here is missing alternative text. It also says there's a very low contrast somewhere on the site. It mentions skipped heading levels and suspicious link text. But this only really gives us a brief idea of what the issue is. So we need to find these things on the site. And as you can see, there are little icons down below the general information that match the icon on the actual page underneath the image. So let's go ahead and track our first error on the website. Now, as you can see, we are going to be documenting the missing alternative text first. Now, alternative text is important for people who rely on screen readers to understand the content that they are listening to when manually scrolling through a site. So it is important if an image has contextual meaning to help push the content that's on the screen, that it has some sort of context for screen readers to read back to those that have poor vision or no vision when they're navigating through a website. Now, if we click the icon under the image, we get the same little description that we got before. Image alternative text is not present. However, if we click the reference link below that, it moves us to the reference box on the side in the sidebar with the wave tool. And here it gives us a broader understanding of what exactly is happening with the missing alternative text. Obviously, it's not present. It tells us why it matters, which is sort of what I've already told you. It also suggests how to fix this issue. And if you go down to the very bottom, we have standards and guidelines that adhere to the fixes that we need to sort of propagate into the code. Speaking of the code, if we click the code link off to the right, it'll actually pull up a small box to show you what the code looks like. And here it shows the image with the source that's pulling in the image. And just as it says, we're missing an alt tag and have no alternative text. So let's go ahead and document this error. We at Media Current tend to use spreadsheets to document all of our issues so that when we move forward, we have a clear idea and understanding of what the issues are. This is sort of a watered down version of the spreadsheets that we specifically use, but it's a really good one and still gives you the general information of what you need. For this first example, I'm going to kind of go through what each one of these areas represent and what they're tracking. Firstly, we start with grouping. So in this case, the problem that we're specifically looking at is an image problem or an alt text problem, but it is related to images. So we are going to group it with images. The next column is who, or who it falls on to fix this problem. In this case, it's potentially a content manager. So shorthand, I put in con because content. It could potentially also be a developer issue. It depends on the website. Is this a quick win? Yes. The quick win column will state whether or not this is something we can quickly take care of and boost your accessibility score. The page or feature that this is a part of. Because this isn't really a part of a feature, it's important that we mark down the page. The URL is very handy for this, but if you don't have a quick URL that you can put in here, just a quick idea of where it exists on the website is important to put here so that we can quickly find it and retest it or fix it as needed. In this case, the page is the About page, and we have that documented now. Details gives us sort of a quick idea of what the problem is. The doctor image doesn't have an alt text attribute. Testing method tells us how we found the issue in the first place. In this case, we used Wave. It's important that we document this for further testing in the future. If we have to document this and then somebody else has to come back along and give us another pair of eyes to make certain that what we've documented is correct, they need to know what we used to find the error in the first place. Now, in the Wave tool, I pointed out that we had guidelines and standards, and it specifically pointed out the 1.1.1 guideline here, which is an A standard. So our level would be A. This is the guideline it's specifically talking about. And our suggested remedy would be to add a descriptive and concise contextual meaning to the doctor image on the About page. It's pretty clear what we need to do here. And because of that, we don't have any extra notes that are really needed for this. However, if this was a more complex issue, we could add into the notes either samples of code that we found or a more concise description of what needs to be fixed or other suggestions for remedies that could potentially work better than the remedy that's being suggested. It's more of a catch-all for any extra information that needs to be added into the spreadsheet for this specific issue. But because this one's so clear on what needs to be taken care of, None of that's really needed here. Now we move on to our next issue, which is the contrast error. The contrast error is specifically pointing out this number here at the top in the header. This light blue does not match well against the white background. It has poor contrast and it can hurt those with poor vision. Now, I want to also note that the logo on the other side of the header also had the same light blue color, but you'll note that it wasn't pointed out as a contrast error. We only got the one contrast error when we started the wave tool. And this is going to kind of give you the idea of the differences between automated and manual testing. We'll come back more to that here later in the testing phase, but I wanted to point that out now because it is an important thing to take note of. As for now, we're going to continue to document our errors. So we click on the icon, and again, we have this list of things that come up. It's very low contrast between foreground and background colors, which is what I just stated. We click on the reference. It gives you more idea about what it means, why it matters, how to fix it, and most importantly, what the standards and guidelines are down here at the bottom. In this case, it's 1.4.3. Unlike the previous issue, we can also work with the contrast part of the wave tool and see where we meet and pass high levels of the AA, AAA compliance area and where we fail it. And we can play around with the contrast until we can find a good color combination that works on that white background, which is really handy because then we can document what we found in the actual spreadsheet as far as which colors may potentially work in fixing this. Speaking of the spreadsheet, we move back to the spreadsheet. Don't have to go over it quite as thoroughly this time because I've introduced you to what all these columns do. But in this case, we're grouping it with branding. In this case, it's also going to be part of the designer and developer fix. It's also going to be a quick win, but we've kind of got to go through that process of dealing with the design before we can pass off the fix to the developer. It's in the header, so it's going to be a global issue because more than likely this is going to exist on the entire site of Generic Hospital. And the details are the health line in the header is failing contrast. Again, we use the wave tool. It was documented to be a AA level issue, and it can be specifically sort of outlined with the 1.4.3 guideline. Our remedy would be to meet with the designer and see what other colors can be used for the specific issue so that we can make the contrast actually hit the ratio needed to pass this level of standards and guidelines. In this case, we actually have notes that we can add here. This could potentially be fixed using a darker blue, which you already see used in the buttons, and is passing the contrast that this part of it isn't. So in this case, we could potentially use something that's already showing up in the branding and just repurpose it for the header and not break out of the branding, which is important to a lot of clients. Now our next issue is headers. This is showing up as an alert, and it's showing that these headers are either skipped or out of order. And the problem with skipped headers is it can cause confusion with people that are navigating a website with alternative means, like screen readers or manually using keyboards to get around. A lot of people can navigate the content on a web page by navigating the semantic order of your HTML mockup. In this case, headers have an understood order of H1 through H6. If it skips, then it breaks that context of the content, and it can cause confusion and lead people sort of to different parts of the website unintentionally, giving them confusion, obviously. So if we click on the icon, it pulls up that we have a skipped heading level. Again, it showcases the different issues here, but now we see that we have different standards and guidelines to go off of. If we look into the code by clicking on the code link here, you can see that it skips directly from an H1 to an H4. So that's problematic because we've skipped H2 and H3, and that's going to give a pretty broad sense of confusion here. Now, we need to figure out which one of these guidelines are going to be the most important thing to attribute here and use to fix the issue. Obviously, we want to shoot for the highest level we can, so 2.4.6 seems to be the correct guideline that we want to adhere to. However, if we look at both of these issues, specifically at the 2.4.6, We see that the issue for the AA involves page headings and labels for forms and interactive controls are informative. That's not really the issue here. So instead, we now have to step through the other guidelines and find exactly where it fixes it. Luckily, I've already done that for you guys here, and it is 1.3.1. Semantic markup is used to designate headings, regions, and landmarks, and that's the problem. We have semantic markup that's out of order. So now we document it. We group it with headings or headers. Content managers are generally going to be the people to take care of this specific issue. It is a very quick win. All you have to do is go on a page and quickly update the header that's being used for that content. It's on the About page. Details on this one would be the quality and safety and classes and events have headers that are semantically out of order. Again, this was found with the Wave tool. It reaches an A level of compliance, and the guideline is 1.3.1. Remedy in this case would be the headers just need to be updated to H2s instead of H4s. Now, the issue that I see on a lot of headers through a lot of sites is they are out of order because they want to have certain styles attributed, and the H4 styles match more on the page for what's wanted by the client than an H2 would. So it may be important that if the styling is currently, or if the styling is important, then we probably need to make these specific H2s match the styling of the H4 instead of just using an H4. That way we can have the best of both worlds here. We'd have the styles that are appropriate for the page, and we have the semantic markup that is wanted for screen readers and various other manual navigation tools. Our next item that is showing up in the alert is non-descriptive text. And this is something that we see happen, again, a lot. And you've probably seen it too, when you're going through a website and you're reading through an article and you only get a synopsis of kind of what that article is for. And then you see a link at the bottom that either says, read more, go here, do this. It's like a 1 to 3 word sort of call to action. But it doesn't really give any context to what's following. It just simply states read more. And in many cases, moving through the website with a screen reader, you can use rotary tools to navigate a site using links. And you're not going to find out a whole lot of what's going on if every link just states read more, read more, read more, read more. It doesn't give you anything meaningful when you're going over them. So you have no clue where you're at on the page. You have no idea what content that read more link is attached to. And that's kind of the big problem with non-descriptive links. So in this case, when we click on the icon, it shows suspicious link text. If we look specifically at the issue at hand, it kind of tells you why it matters, how to fix it again, and the standards guidelines. But more importantly, when we click on the code, you can see there's absolutely nothing for that link that gives any sort of information on how to fix this. So documenting this for the spreadsheet, we're going to group it with links. This is going to be a developer fix or potentially a content manager fix, but more than likely this will be a dev fix. It's a quick win because it's a very small snippet of code that will need to be fixed. Again, it's on the About page, and it is the read more buttons. They don't have any contextual information for screen readers. That needs to be dealt with. We found it using the Wave tool. You know what the guideline is here. You know what level it is. And the remedy for this one is we would use an ARIA label attribute to apply to the link specifically to give it contextual meaning that people using screen readers coming through the site would then understand what that link is in reference to. So the ARIA label exists on the link tag itself, and screen readers will pick up the label and read it out. So it may state, this link will take you to the biography page, or this link will take you to pictures of cars, or something like that. But it'll still showcase the visual part of it to state read more. So again, now you get the best of both worlds. You fix an accessibility issue, and you don't mess up the visual aspect of it by having a button that has a paragraph of text in it. Now, I mentioned this before, but there is a big issue with automated versus manual testing. And okay, so the tools are cool. Like, they can really help in gathering information on where errors exist on your site. And you'd think that would be enough. And you call it a day just by running these automated tools over the top of your website, but you can't. The problem is that when using these tools, you're sort of limited to what they can actually do. And they're only really programmed to search for certain things in certain ways. In many cases, these tools aren't able to find accessibility issues on a website because it really comes down to just interpretation of the content. And something that we haven't been able to pick up on of this content with the automated tools is the visual flow and the manual navigation. So the visual flow of the site when you're manually navigating the content is out of order. And I know because I've created the website, but I can show you exactly what I mean here. So manual navigation includes keyboard users. And keyboard users can quickly get through a website by using the tab button and various other keystrokes and shortcuts to speed through content on a website. Tab is a big sort of navigating tool on a broad level and can get you from link to link to link to link really quick and easily. In this case, it will take us from our header to our first link, to our second link, to our third link on this specific page. And when your content is out of order visually with the manual content that you're navigating through, it can quickly cause confusion as to where you're actually at on the site, because you're expecting it to go to that first read more link, and instead it goes to the second one. It then goes up instead of down, and then it goes all the way to the bottom of the page. And while this isn't the biggest issue, because this is only a page that has 5 links, imagine if content like this is out of order on a page that has 30 links, and you go from the header down to near the footer, somewhere to the middle part of the page, down back to the footer, and you start bouncing up and down. You can't really ingest the content and digest it that way because it's so confusing to visually read that when you're bouncing all over the website with your manual tools. So when the content is out of order visually, like we're showing here, it can lead to confusion. In this case, the content is arranged in such a way that it shows our goal above the quality and safety section. And like I said, this is fine on a visual level, but if you're a keyboard user, this is frustrating. And it kind of shows the disconnect between the visual representation of the website and the structural flow of the content. And this can cause visual confusion for users that have to navigate a site via rotary tools or by using the keyboard. And automated tools are really good for getting a start on documenting issues on a website, but because of the limitations, they only really catch maybe 25 to 30% of the problems. So in testing, it's best to use manual tools as well, because manual tools consist of screen readers and keyboard usage, and you're never really going to understand where your issues are on a website until you try to navigate the same way that others have to. And then you really get a sense of where the shortcomings exist. Now, I mentioned this previously, but one of the other issues here is contrast. The contrast for the image in the header doesn't get picked up on the automated tools because the automated tools can't really parse what the color is in the image versus the background. And that's another instance of that sort of manual interpretation of content on a website that you're really going to have to take the time to look at and understand where things work and where things don't work. Now for this specific issue, because the automated tools don't pick things up, you can't really depend on them to document it. So you're going to have to dig through the guidelines and find sort of the issue that works best for this when trying to figure out how to fix it. Now I've done that for you here, so we don't have to dig through a page of a lot of different potential guidelines, but it is something that you'll have to start getting familiar with as you're moving forward, start documenting your own websites in the future. For this, we're going to document this as a visual flow issue. It is a developer issue. This specific issue is not really a quick win because you're going to be moving things around on a page, both content-wise and code-wise. It's still only about page. Specifically, it's when tabbing through the site manually. The bottom read more link is focused on before the top. We found this using keyboard testing. It is an A-level standard, and it was found to be 2.4.3, so your focus order on the web page is out of order. The remedy on this one would be content is being put out of order using CSS, so we need to fix the styles doing this and potentially rearrange the content manually to get things in the correct area that they're wanted. And the notes that are added to this one, the issue for this comes when keyboard users are trying to tab through a site. So the physical navigation doesn't match the visual navigation, causing the confusion for the user. Okay, so we've managed to identify, track, and outline how to correct these issues. You now know how to use automated tools and the difference between automated and manual testing. The key things that I really want you to take away from this today specifically are: you learn how to perform accessibility tests on your website, and you do so every few months. You make sure your accessibility levels are meeting the 508 compliance standards, which is that AA and AAA standard. You learn how to document the errors in a way that makes it easy to fix them moving forward, and make accessibility a priority at your organization and involve various teams. We didn't really quite touch on this one too much in this, but accessibility is not simply a one-man job. At Media Current, we specifically use multiple people from different backgrounds when dealing with accessibility. Our designers start with an accessibility mindset when they're making a design. There's a conversation between the front-end devs and the designers to make certain that we put in accessible features when designing it. This goes all the way back to the back-end devs who have to find proper plugins and whatnot that hit accessibility standards and don't break functionality. And as accessibility continues to expand and grow, new fixes and new ways to easily navigate the site eventually come up. And it's up to project managers to understand what those fixes and changes are as well, so that they can accurately describe to the client why those things are important. So accessibility, again, it involves the entire team. It's not just a one-person job. And experiment with accessibility tools to find which works best for your organization. Because while there isn't really one that is a magic tool that does everything, there might be a magic tool for you and your organization. One that the user interface just makes more sense. So go out there and test. The Wave tool is something I really enjoy using. Lighthouse is something I really enjoy using, but there are dozens of tools out there that do roughly the same thing. And it always helps to understand how to use multiple tools, because some of these tools pick up issues that others don't. All right. So with that, I'm going to hand this back over to Jesse for a little bit while I take some water in to quench my throat.
Yeah, thank you, David, for all of the great information you shared. One last thing before we open for questions. Much of the content on accessibility covered in the presentation can be found in our ebook, the Accessibility Best Practices for Non-Developers, that you're seeing right here. You can download it at the link provided on the slide. Otherwise, we'll be sharing the link to download the ebook in the webinar recap email as well. So make sure to check that out. So now we will take some time to go through additional questions. Please continue to add questions to the Q&A. We already have several that have come in, but we'll get through as many questions as we can in the remaining time we have. From here, Jason, want to take things over and go through some of the questions that came in?
Absolutely. And thanks for submitting, and keep doing so. We don't have too many questions yet, so we definitely can still get to yours if you submit it. So the first question here is, any way that you can export this report so that we can work on the Wave issues identified? So that was, from a little bit earlier with the automated testing tools. What David was showing was the browser extension, and I believe it's available for Firefox and Chrome, David?
Yes.
I don't think it's, yeah, right. And we use that one kind of as a first pass usually. There's a couple others that are similar. But the question about whether you can download a report or export one, not that I'm aware of with the extension, because it's free. It's kind of kind of up to you how to use it. If you go to the Wave website, they do actually have two different products that they do offer to export reports, or I think even more in-depth analysis. They look like they're pretty expensive. I would also mention that for that type of more tracking of identifying issues and resolving them, even sometimes for legal purposes, we use a service called Site Improve more often. It's much more robust. It does more than accessibility as well. So a lot of our clients will have a license for that, and then they'll share that with us so we can use that.
Yeah. If you're willing to put forth a little bit of money on many of these things, there will be a means to export things. Jason beat me to it. I was going to bring up Site Improve as well.
Yeah.
It has a means to export, but again, you've got to pay a fee to get into that part of Site Improve. All right. What else do we have?
David, I'll throw this one at you. I have heard that it's best not to use ARIA labels if you don't have to. Is this correct?
It is best not to use ARIA in most cases. If we can get around using ARIA, there has to be, if there's a better means to dealing with accessibility other than ARIA, that's generally going to be your first idea or your first fix. Mm-hmm. In some cases, you can't help it. You have to either add like an ARIA role or an ARIA label or some other ARIA fix that works hand in hand with screen readers. In this instance, there's probably a better fix for the read more link than using an ARIA label, but I wanted to throw that out there just so I could have a chance to sort of touch on using content visually versus behind the scenes. But yeah, most cases, if we can avoid the ARIA parts of it, we want to use the semantic markup the way it is first.
Right. I'd add that too, that it's also easier for maintenance long-term, because especially if you're using like a CMS, you know, if you're updating content, now you also have to remember to go in and update the ARIA label as well. So,
well, that might not be an issue if it's a built node or a component or something.
Right. If your developer's really good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I'll add to that one too. Another question: do you recommend avoiding read more links, or do you suggest including visually hidden text or ARIA to provide additional information about the link?
So there's actually that's actually the better option here, is using visually hidden text. I wouldn't suggest moving away from read more links if you add the visually hidden text to give it more context. However, if you're not willing to use the visually hidden text, then I wouldn't suggest using the read more links. The visually hidden text, in this case, what's being talked about here, for anybody who's not really sure what's going on, there are certain styles that we can do that can add in a span after read more. So it would actually read, for a screen reader, read more about David Barrentine's blog. But then about David Barrentine's blog is put into its own span or something that has a class added to it that is hiding it from the visual part of this, but making certain that it's still present for people that have to use screen readers, so they still have contextual understanding of what that link is heading towards. I hope that answers the question, and I didn't just ramble.
Yeah. No, I think so. And well, I would just, you know, again, I think the key for read more text is that you want each link to have something unique in it. So when someone's using a screen reader, you know, it'll read them out. That also will pop up as redundant text in almost every tool you use. It'll let you know right away, hey, you have a bunch of read more links, and that's not good.
And it's not just about having it unique. It's about having it unique to the content contextually.
Yes. Yeah. Correct. Okay. So is the 25 to 30% of issues missed by automated tools your own experience, David, or are you basing that on some published research?
A little bit of both. I've only really gotten into accessibility in the last couple of years, and it seems that automated tools are starting to catch more. When I first started, a lot of the stuff that I was reading on different online sources were stating that was catching between 20 and 25%. In the last year or so, that seems to be going up based off of what I've been reading. And you can get some of those sources. Like, I can't think of them off the top of my head, but when we were putting together our training, accessibility training packet, we were gathering those sources, and we have a lot of online links that can lead to what we use to get the packet together. And within those, you'll find sort of the documented areas where it's stating exactly how many an automated tool can pick up versus how much a manual tool can pick up. And that being said, during my own audits, I've noticed that I tend to catch a lot more. I wouldn't be able to put it in a ratio of percentages, but I do know that I catch a lot more by just interpreting the data that's on a screen and manually trying to get through it than I would using automated tools. Like a big part of this would be web forms. So automated tools may pick up that they're orphan labels or there are no labels. So there's maybe some missing contextual meaning, but functionality is never really picked up a whole lot by automated tools. And you're not really going to understand where the functionality is lacking until you try to get through a web form manually, not just using a mouse.
Okay, so here's one. Should alt text be localized? In other words, when an English site is translated, hopefully localized, should the alt text also be in these the person who's viewing their browser language, or in this case, French is the person who's added to the question. And I would say, yeah, definitely,
Yep.
Right? They're essential to tell users what an image is about. So if the rest of your content on that page is localized, it would make sense to localize the alt tags as well.
Yep.
Right.
And I mean, if you don't localize it, if it stays English and everything else on the page is French, I mean, it's an accessibility issue because yet again, you're excluding people. But in this case, it's not just because of alt text; it's because of language barriers.
I do think that's a great question, though, because I don't think that even when we're working with clients and on multilingual sites, like that's something we definitely need to let them know about because that can easily be missed. Yeah. Because it's amazing how many, when we do site audits for client sites, we find a lot of images without alt tags just by default. And so you can imagine how much it gets missed when you're doing multilingual sites as well. So great question.
Yeah, that really is a good question.
Yeah. I'll post one at you, David. Are old school image maps accessible? Is there an automated way to test them?
Old school image maps.
That does seem old school.
Yeah. Can you give me an example? Because that's not ringing any bells for me. I only got into web development maybe 5 years ago. So this is
yeah.
I didn't do anything old school like early 2000s. So I'm not sure what an image map would be off the top of my head.
Okay. So if the person who submitted that, can they maybe just once again in the Q&A, just maybe give me a little bit more clarity around that, and we can do our best. Okay. Have you had to deal with PDF documents on websites? We try to avoid them, but get requests to post them online.
Yes. Primarily in a lot of instances, it's like there's not a whole lot we can do in some. However, interactive PDFs are the big contributing issue. And there's a lot to PDF accessibility. There's a lot to it. I can't really go into a whole lot of it here or else it'd be a completely different sort of seminar. Yeah. But yes, PDFs are something that we look into when we're dealing with accessibility. Again, it's got it comes with its own bag of issues. And it's important that when you're testing in those, you find the correct automated tool to help you when trying to log the issues. That's just going to go back to testing which automated tools works best for you in those instances, though.
Yeah, and I know from experience, we work with a good number of education, .edu sites, and one we just recently did an audit for, and then did some accessibility fixes for. One of the big things that they had, I think a lot of organizations rely on PDFs because it's a lot of times easier to kind of output something from like a Word doc or something and just put it on the website. And that's become something that they are this particular college did get flagged for that, and they had quite a few. So it's definitely something your organization should be considering, and work to kind of give anyone who's going to be exporting the PDFs or website, give them some guidance to make sure that they're following the best practices there.
Yeah. PDFs, man, they're I'm pretty sure the P in that stands for pain.
Okay. Here's a question. Do you offer accessibility audits or accessibility training?
We absolutely do. So as Jesse was talking about, we do have a training manual that we can share. And Media Current specifically does offer accessibility audits. I believe there are 2 different types of audits that are offered. To my knowledge, there's a quick audit, which kind of gives you a quick idea of where your site is sitting as far as an accessibility score, and then a deeper dive into it, which would give a better understanding of where you're at. It would pull top 10 pages, get the most components on the site so that we can really dig in there and find what works and what doesn't work. Jesse, can you speak to that? Do you know any kind of further exactly what's offered through marketing?
Yeah, I can share. We have like an accessibility landing page, but otherwise your best bet is probably just to fill out our contact form. I'll enter in the chat the accessibility page that has a little more information, but just reaching out, and it's kind of a more individualized, what the needs are for that client to customize, what the audit would look like.
There you go.
There you go. Let's see. Did we cover this one? Should we avoid using the I or B tag versus using the strong or M tag? I don't think we got to that one yet, right?
No, we haven't gotten to that one.
Okay, so it's a great question. You want to take it, David? Go ahead.
I have heard both ways that we should avoid it and we shouldn't. I don't avoid an I tag because there's semantic understanding to what an I tag is. But if you use an I tag, you need to also have some text attributed to it that gives contextual meaning. I mean, an I tag is an icon, and that's generally what's going to be put in there. But okay, this is going to go back to the idea between automated and manual testing. Not all icons or images need an alt tag. In some cases, they're really just there as flourish. And I've seen a lot of icons be used as a means to wrap a link around an image. What is more important in that case is that the link has the contextual meaning and the icon doesn't really need it. So if the link is saying, link, check out our Facebook page, then you know that you're clicking on an icon or an item or a button that is taking you to Facebook, and the contextual meaning is already there.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a little bit of a gray area. I agree. In fact, I think I really avoid the I tag because I think it gets confused between icon or like kind of old school italic.
Yeah.
In fact, I did a little bit of Googling on this when I got the question just to make sure that I was right, because I would say we probably avoid the B and the I tag usually. But I have found that the I tag will get flagged more often in automated tools. But the M and the strong tag are really for emphasis. So in a screen reader, that's probably what you're gonna want if you really want something to pop out to the listener. And that can also be added to like a header tag to even add more emphasis. And I believe when HTML5 standards were finished in 2014, that's kind of when it was more formally set, so that was kind of the purpose of the two different sets of tags. And so the B and the I are more for presentation. And so like if you just want something to be bold or you're using a class to make us, to style something differently, that's probably where you want to use it, like maybe in a paragraph where you're quoting somebody. So I think that's probably, M and strong tags are probably the safest way to go.
Yeah, it is the safest way to go. But like I said, I wouldn't say we have to absolutely avoid the other ones if there is at least contextual meaning. But it's kind of a new and more unique thing, specifically with screen readers, is having an inherent voice to the content that's being read.
Right. Okay, so I have a follow-up question on the image map.
Okay.
Looks like. And so the map element was a way of specifying hotspots on an image, right? And then he's not sure if there's a modern solution to the kind of image map use case.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I know what we're talking about, image maps now. And I will be honest, that's going to have to be something I will have to look into, because since I've gotten into accessibility, that's not something that I've come back up against.
Right.
However, the few things I have seen pointed out is they can be an accessibility nightmare.
Yeah. And a little bit more information too is that seems like the hotspots show up in the tab order of links on the site. So yeah, it definitely does. Maps get pretty tricky.
Yeah.
Just in general.
Very true. That is true. But again, that's something that I would have to look more into. It's
Okay.
I don't want to give information on something that I don't have sufficient information on.
Right. Me neither, but it's definitely something to look into. Let's see what else here. Anything?
We're starting to run on time too, so we can do 2 or 3 more questions, and then I think we're gonna have to wrap it up.
Yeah, actually, I think we're pretty good. Actually, let's see. Yeah, we've covered everything. I know there's one here about a map in Drupal, but I think it just gets a little bit too deep into what we can really cover quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But we can certainly follow up with that, separately. Or if you even go and if the person who asked that question could even go to our contact form and submit it, we could certainly dive a little bit deeper into it.
Oh, absolutely. If you want to go to the contact form and start a conversation with us,
yep,
you can lead some of our research there for a little bit, and as we find things out, we can continue talking to you and touching base with this.
Absolutely, yeah, and feel free to, there's no strings attached.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So do you have anything else?
I do not have anything else. Nope.
All right. Well, in that case, Jesse, I think we're done.
Okay. Well, yeah, that will wrap up today's presentation and brings us to the end of our webinar. Please visit our website, www.mediacurrent.com, for more information. We have a lot of content on accessibility. If you check out our resources, a lot of different blog posts and ebooks. So feel free to check that out. As mentioned, we will be providing the recording, so be on the lookout for that. And thanks again to our presenters, David and Jason, and for everyone that tuned in today. We hope to see you next time, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.